Hello, dear viewers. Welcome to Alcott Stories, where love, betrayal, and redemption come to life in the most unexpected ways. Today, I bring you a story that will shock you, break your heart, and then heal it again. The Billionaire's Regret is not just a love story. It's a journey of passion, loss, and the painful realization of true love only when it's too late. What happens when a millionaire chooses beauty over loyalty? What happens when the woman who loved him the most is forced to move on? Will he get a second chance? Or will regret be his only companion forever? I promise you, this story will captivate your heart, bring tears to your eyes, and keep you hooked till the very last moment. Don't skip a second. Watch till the end, and I guarantee you won't regret it. If you love emotional and suspenseful love stories, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an unforgettable tale. Now, let's begin. But be warned, this story will stay with you long after it ends. A life of devotion, the Grand Carter mansion stood like a towering palace in the wealthiest part of the city. Behind its gold-plated gates and towering glass walls lived Damian Carter, a 30-year-old self-made millionaire CEO. With his deep brown eyes, sculpted features, and neatly groomed beard, he had the face of a Greek god and the reputation of a businessman who could make or break fortunes. But beyond the polished exterior of his perfect life, there was one person who saw a different side of him. Isabella Brooks, the beautiful young maid who had quietly served in his house for the past 2 years, knew Damian like no one else. With stunning eyes, a captivating figure, and dark braided hair that framed her delicate face, she carried herself with a grace far beyond her position. She was not just a maid. She was the one who ensured his shirts were perfectly pressed before his morning meetings. She was the one who brewed his favorite coffee exactly how he liked it, strong, with a touch of cinnamon. She was the one who made sure his home felt like home. And somewhere in the quiet moments, she had fallen in love, the love she could never speak. Of Isabella's love was silent, buried deep inside her heart. She wasn't foolish. She knew the difference between their worlds. He was a millionaire. She was his maid. But every time he smiled at her, every time he thanked her for a simple gesture, her heart whispered the truth. She loved him, and she feared she always would. Damian, despite his cold and distant nature with the world, had always treated her with kindness. He never raised his voice, never humiliated her like the other wealthy men she had worked for in the past. His kindness made her fall harder. She longed to tell him, but how could she? Would he laugh? Would he fire her? Would he pity her? So instead, she buried her feelings. She pressed his suits with trembling fingers. She watched him from afar when he wasn't looking. She memorized his likes and dislikes, his moods, his habits. Everything about him became her world. But he never saw her as more than just a maid, or so she thought. The moment that changed everything. One chilly evening, Isabella stood in Damian's massive walk-in closet, pressing his expensive Armani suit. The scent of his cologne still lingered on the fabric, making her heart ache with longing. She had spent all day thinking about him, about the man who had unknowingly stolen her heart, and before she could stop herself, she whispered, "Sir, I wish my future husband would be like you." She paused, her heart pounding in her chest. What had she done? Had he heard? She turned, her hands gripping the iron tightly, but Damian was standing at the door. His deep brown eyes were locked on hers. For a moment, Neither of them spoke. Heat rushed to Isabella's cheeks as she tried to swallow her embarrassment. "You're my ideal," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your kindness, your loyalty to your family, the way you treat people. Your wife will be so lucky." For the first time, Damian's confident smirk faded. A shadow crossed his face, something unreadable, something almost broken. Then he gave a small, sad smile. "No, dear," he murmured, his voice distant. "I am not a good man." And without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Isabella standing there, confused, and hoping that one day he would see her as more than just a maid. Lost in thoughts of love, the golden glow of the evening sun filtered through the towering glass windows of Carter Mansion, casting a warm hue over the grand staircase. The house was silent, peaceful, except for the rapid heartbeat of Isabella Brooks. She walked down the marble stairs, her delicate fingers trailing along the railing, lost in thoughts of Damian Carter, the way he had looked at her last night, the sadness in his eyes, the words he had whispered. "No, dear, I am not a good man." Why had he said that? What did he mean? Her heart ached to know his pain, his secrets. But more than that, she longed for him to see what had been in her heart for so long. She was in love with him, and she was slowly breaking under the weight of unspoken emotions. The unexpected collision. At that exact moment, Damian Carter entered through the front doors, loosening his tie, his mind consumed by something he couldn't quite understand. Isabella. Since last night, her voice had echoed in his mind. "Sir, I wish my husband would be like you. You are my ideal." Her words had shaken something inside him. For the first time, he saw her not just as the woman who managed his house, but as a woman who had always been there, a woman who knew him better than anyone, a woman who for some reason made his chest tighten with an emotion he didn't want to name. As he hurried up the staircase, his thoughts tangled with hers. Fate intervened. They collided. Falling into each other's arms, Isabella gasped as her feet slipped. Her body tilted backward, and a cry escaped her lips. Damian's instincts kicked in. His strong arms shot out, grabbing her waist, trying to steady her. But he too lost balance. Time slowed. She clutched at his shirt as their bodies tumbled down the last few steps, twisting, turning, until they landed, tangled together. And then, silence. Isabella lay beneath Damian, her soft curves pressed against his strong body. Her breath was shallow. His was ragged. Their faces were so close, too close. Damian felt the heat of her skin, the rapid rise and fall of her chest against his. His hands were on her waist, gripping her tightly. His heart thundered. And then he inhaled her, a fragrance, soft, intoxicating, uniquely hers, wrapped around him, sinking into his veins like a slow-burning fire. For the first time, he noticed everything. Her lips, plump, full, slightly parted. Her eyes, deep pools of warmth and mystery. Her skin, smooth, glowing, too perfect. Something shifted inside him, something dangerous. The moment that changed everything. Isabella lay frozen beneath him, her heart pounding so loudly she feared he could hear it. Her hands clutched his shoulders, her breathing uneven. Never in her dreams had she been this close to him. She saw it, the change in his gaze, the way he was fighting something, the way his fingers tightened slightly around her waist, as if he didn't want to let go. Seconds passed, minutes, or maybe it was just one endless heartbeat of suspended time. And then Damian moved. His fingers brushed her cheek, his touch hot, lingering, Slowly, he cupped her face, and then he leaned in, not for a kiss, but to press a deep, slow, reverent kiss on her forehead, a confession that shook her world. Isabella's lips trembled, her body melted at the tenderness of his touch, and then his voice, low, hoarse, thick with something unspoken. My sweetheart. Her breath hitched. I love you. Isabella's entire world stopped. I really love you. How foolish I was to never see your beauty before. Her vision blurred with tears. Was this real? Had he really just confessed? The man she had loved in silence for so long loved her back. Tears spilled from her eyes before she could stop them. She had dreamed of this moment. But now that it was here, she felt like she was floating between reality and fantasy. Damian wiped her tears, his thumb brushing against her soft cheek. I mean it, he whispered. You are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, and I was a fool to never notice before. Isabella let out a shaky breath, her entire being trembling with emotions too big to contain. And in that moment, their love story truly began. A secret place for two hearts. The days after Damian's confession felt like a dream, a beautiful, dangerous dream. Isabella had spent years silently loving him. Now, suddenly, his eyes searched for her. His voice softened when he spoke her name. She wasn't just his maid anymore. She was the woman he loved, and in the golden glow of the evenings, their love blossomed in secret. The rooftop of Carter Mansion became their world, a place where the CEO and his maid were just a man and a woman, two hearts beating for each other. The first night on the rooftop. That night, the city lights sparkled in the distance as Isabella climbed up the iron staircase leading to the hidden rooftop. Her hands trembled. Her heart raced. This was the first time she was meeting Damian alone. Would he regret confessing? Would he still look at her the way he had that day on the staircase? When she stepped onto the rooftop, her breath caught. Damian was already there, leaning against the railing, dressed in his white shirt, his sleeves rolled up, revealing his strong arms. The cool breeze lifted his hair slightly, and the way the moonlight kissed his sharp jawline and brown eyes made Isabella's stomach tighten. Then he turned, and his gaze locked onto hers. Something changed in the air, something undeniable. Isabella, he murmured, stepping closer. Her pulse skipped. Sir. He placed a finger on her lips. No more, sir. Just Damian. Her heart clenched at the intimacy in his voice. Damian, she whispered, and he smiled, a real breathtaking smile. Whispered dreams and hidden love. They sat on a wooden bench at the edge of the rooftop, looking over the glittering city. Their shoulders brushed, their breaths mingled. For the first time, Damian spoke about himself, about how love never made sense to him until now, how he had always thought relationships were shallow, temporary. But with Isabella, he felt something deeper, something unshakable. And Isabella, she told him everything, how she had watched him from afar, how she had admired his kindness, his loyalty to his family, how she had prayed that one day she would find a husband like him. Damian turned to her, his gaze burning. You were in front of me all along, Isabella, and I was too blind to see you. Her lips parted. The air grew heavier. The moment felt fragile, precious. Then, slowly, Damian reached out. His fingers brushed against hers, then interlocked them. A shiver ran through Isabella as he gently lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. The warmth of his lips against her skin sent sparks through her body. From now on, this hand belongs to me, he whispered. I will never let it go. Tears pricked Isabella's eyes. Even though I'm just a maid, she asked softly. Damian's expression hardened. You are not just a maid, Isabella. You are the woman I love. Her breath hitched, and in that moment she believed him. A love that burned like fire. Every evening after that, they met on the rooftop. The world never knew. But up there, under the stars, they were free. They whispered about their dreams, their love, their future. Damian dreamed of traveling the world with her. Isabella dreamed of simply staying by his side. Their fingers would touch. Their hearts would race. And slowly, very slowly, the fire between them grew. A forbidden fire, a dangerous fire, and neither of them knew that it was only a matter of time before that fire consumed them completely. A new awareness days turned into weeks, and something inside Damian Carter began to shift. He had always known Isabella was beautiful. Her stunning eyes, her flawless skin, the way her neatly braided hair framed her delicate face. He wasn't blind to it. But now, it wasn't just her beauty that captivated him. It was her presence, her soft voice when she greeted him every morning, the gentle way she pressed his suits, ensuring he always looked perfect, the way her laughter filled the air like music, melting away the stress of his long days. Damian had spent years building his empire, making money, climbing to the top. But for the first time, he realized something shocking. His success felt empty without Isabella. She wasn't just a maid. She was his peace, his happiness, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. A day without her, one morning, Damian woke up, expecting to see Isabella, waiting with his morning coffee. But she wasn't there. Instead, another maid approached hesitantly. Sir, Isabella is sick today. She won't be coming downstairs. A strange unease settled in his chest. Isabella, sick. It felt wrong. She had been so full of life the night before, when they had met on the rooftop. Now, she was confined to her small room, and the house suddenly felt empty. The coffee tasted bitter. His breakfast felt tasteless. His expensive suit, pressed by someone else, felt uncomfortable. Nothing felt right without Isabella. And that's when it hit him. The truth he had been avoiding. He needed Isabella, not just as someone who took care of him, but as someone who completed him. She wasn't just a woman he loved. She was the missing part of his soul. All day at work, he couldn't focus. Meetings blurred together. Contracts didn't make sense. His assistant kept repeating things, but his mind was somewhere else. At home, with her. By evening, he couldn't take it anymore. Damian cancelled his meetings and rushed home. A moment of realization. As soon as he entered the mansion, he ignored everyone and went straight to Isabella's small room in the servants' quarters. The door was slightly open. She was lying on the bed, her face turned away, her body weak. Damian had never seen her so vulnerable. His heart clenched. He knocked softly. Isabella. Her body tensed at the sound of his voice. She slowly turned, and when their eyes met, Damian felt a sharp tug in his chest. Her usual radiance was missing. Her lips, those soft, stunning lips that had captivated him, were dry. Her eyes, those beautiful, expressive eyes, looked tired. She tried to sit up, but he rushed forward and gently pressed her back down. Don't move, he said softly. You need to rest. She blinked in surprise. Sir, you came to see me. He frowned. Of course I did. And stop calling me sir. A weak smile touched her lips. But you're my boss. No, he whispered. brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. I'm not just your boss, Isabella. Not anymore. She froze. His fingers lingered against her skin, memorizing the warmth of her. Damian, she breathed. Hearing his name from her lips sent a deep ache through his heart. At that moment, he knew this was real. His feelings for her weren't temporary or fleeting. They were permanent, unshakable. Isabella wasn't just a part of his life. She was his life, the depth of his care. That night, Damian stayed by her side. He brought her warm soup, made sure she took her medicine, and even adjusted her pillows. The maids watched in shock. Their cold, untouchable boss taking care of a maid like she was royalty. But Damian didn't care. All he cared about was her. When Isabella finally fell asleep, he didn't leave. Instead, he sat beside her bed, watching her, his heart aching with a feeling he had never experienced before. Love. Deep, overwhelming love. And in that quiet moment, Damian made a silent promise to himself. He would never let her go. Not now. Not ever. A night that changed everything. The sky was painted in hues of silver and blue, the full moon casting a soft glow over the grand rooftop of Damian Carter's mansion. A cool breeze whispered through the night, rustling Isabella's neatly braided hair as she stood by the railing, gazing up at the endless sky. Damian stood a few feet behind her, his hands tucked into his pockets, watching her in silence. She looked beautiful, not in the extravagant way of women he had known in his world, women draped in designer dresses, dripping in diamonds. No, Isabella's beauty was natural, effortless, breathtaking. For weeks, Damian had battled the emotions that consumed him: love, need, fear. But tonight, under the glow of the moon, he was done fighting. Taking a deep breath, he walked closer until he stood beside her. The unspoken words. Isabella felt his presence before she saw him. Her heart quickened. There was something different about him tonight, a quiet intensity in his gaze, a warmth in his touch as his fingers brushed against hers on the railing. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stood there, breathing in the night, lost in the quiet rhythm of each other's presence. Finally, Damian broke the silence. You always look at the moon like it holds secrets, he murmured. Isabella smiled softly. Maybe because it does. It watches over us every night. Maybe it knows things we don't. Damian turned his head slightly, studying her face. What do you think it knows about us, Isabella? Her breath caught. It was the first time he had ever said her name like that. Like it was something precious, something sacred. She turned to look at him, her deep, stunning eyes locking with his. That we're both afraid to say what's in our hearts, she whispered. A silence settled between them, heavy and electric. Then, Damian took a step closer. A love confession under the stars. The wind carried the scent of Isabella's soft fragrance, intoxicating him. Damian reached out, his fingers hesitating, before cupping her face gently. Her skin was warm beneath his touch, her lips slightly parted in surprise. I don't want to be afraid anymore, he admitted, his voice raw with emotion. Isabella's breath shuddered. Damian. His thumb traced the curve of her cheek, his heart pounding against his ribs. I want to marry you, Isabella. His voice was barely above a whisper, but the weight of his words shook her entire world. Isabella's eyes widened. What? Be my wife, he said, his gaze never leaving hers. I love you. I don't care what the world thinks. I don't care what society says. I just want you, only you. A tear slipped down Isabella's cheek. For so long, She had loved him in silence, never daring to believe that her feelings could be returned. And now, standing beneath the moonlight, the man she had secretly adored was offering her his heart. "Damien," she whispered again, her voice trembling. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her against his chest. "Say yes, Isabella," he murmured into her hair. "Tell me you'll be mine." A heart that had always belonged to him. Isabella felt overwhelmed, breathless. She had never imagined a life where she could be more than just a maid in Damian Carter's house. And yet, here he was, choosing her over everything. Tears welled up in her eyes, her heart bursting with emotions too big to contain. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him, and then she smiled. A soft, radiant smile filled with love, hope, and endless devotion. "Yes," she whispered. A slow, relieved smile spread across Damien's face. And then, unable to hold back any longer, he kissed her. Not just a kiss of passion, but of promises, of forever. The moon watched in silent approval as Damian Carter, the billionaire who had once believed he had everything, finally realized that his true fortune was standing right in front of him. A love that couldn't be broken. Or so they thought. That night, they made a promise under the stars, to be together, to love without fear. But love has its tests, and soon a storm would come, one that would shake the very foundation of their love. And when that storm arrived, Damien would make the worst mistake of his life. He would let her go, and he would regret it forever. A moment of pure happiness. Tears welled up in Isabella's eyes as Damien's words echoed in her mind. "I want to marry you, Isabella. Be my wife." She had dreamed of this moment, imagined it in countless ways, but never dared to believe it could be real. Now, standing under the glow of the moon, in the arms of the man she had silently loved for so long, the weight of her emotions was too much to contain. Her lips trembled as she whispered the only word that her heart had been screaming. "Yes." Her voice broke with emotion. And the moment she spoke, Damien pulled her tightly into his arms. She buried her face in his chest, gripping his shirt as if afraid he would disappear. Her tears soaked into the fabric, but Damien didn't care. He wrapped his arms around her, like she was the most precious thing in the world. A love too strong to hide. Damien closed his eyes, breathing her in, feeling the rapid beat of her heart against his own. She was shaking, not out of fear, but out of joy. He pulled back slightly, tilting her chin up so she could look at him. Tears sparkled in her eyes, her lips quivering with a smile so beautiful that it nearly shattered him. "Isabella," he murmured, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "You have no idea how much you mean to me." She sniffled, laughing softly through her tears. I thought I could never have you," she admitted. "You are rich, powerful, and I'm just a maid." Damien frowned, his grip on her tightening. "Don't ever say that again," he said firmly. "You are not just a maid. You are my heart. You are the only person in my life who truly understands me, who cares for me, not because of my wealth, but because of who I am. You have been by my side every single day, loving me in silence. I was too blind to see it, but I swear to you, Isabella, I will never be blind again." A fresh wave of tears escaped her eyes, and this time, they weren't just tears of love. They were tears of relief. The sweetest embrace. Without thinking, Isabella threw her arms around his neck, holding him as tightly as she could. Damien let out a deep breath, his arms wrapping around her waist, lifting her slightly off the ground. Her heart bounded. this was real. This was happening. She could feel his warmth, his love, the way he held her, like he never wanted to let go. I love you, she whispered against his neck, her voice barely audible. But Damian heard it, and it broke something inside him. His arms tightened, and he whispered into her hair, I love you too, sweetheart. More than I ever knew was possible. They stayed like that for what felt like forever. Two souls, once distant, now finding home in each other. The wind danced around them, the stars above shining brighter than ever, as if blessing their love. A promise sealed with a kiss. Damian gently pulled back, cupping her cheeks in his hands. Say it again, he murmured. I want to hear it. Isabella blushed, lowering her gaze. You already know. He chuckled softly, lifting her chin until their eyes met again. I want to hear it, Isabella. His voice was soft, teasing. Please. She hesitated for a moment, then smiled. I love you, Damian. His heart thundered in his chest. And then, he did something he had been longing to do since the night he first realized he loved her. He kissed her. A deep, tender kiss filled with all the emotions they had been holding back. Isabella felt her knees go weak, but Damian held her close, steadying her as their lips moved in perfect harmony. Her fingers dug into his shirt, savoring the warmth of his body, the taste of his love. The world disappeared around them. Nothing else existed except this moment. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, both overwhelmed, Damian rested his forehead against hers. You are mine, Isabella, he whispered, and I will never let you go. She smiled through her happy tears. I was always yours, Damian. A promise was made that night, a promise of forever, a promise that no one, not even fate, could break. But fate has its own way of testing love, and soon the storm would come, one that would test everything they had built, one that would make Damian forget this promise, and one that would leave Isabella broken. The calm before the storm. That night, Damian held Isabella close, whispering sweet promises against her skin. Neither of them knew that this happiness was fragile, that in the near future, Damian would make the worst mistake of his life, a mistake that would cost him the woman he now held so dearly, a mistake he would regret forever. But for now, they were happy, and sometimes happiness is the most dangerous illusion of all. A love that grew stronger. The days that followed Damian's proposal were nothing short of magical. Every evening, they met on the rooftop, whispering their dreams, their love, their future. Damian had never felt this way before. His heart, once untouched by true love, now beat only for Isabella. She wasn't just beautiful. She was his peace, his happiness, his reason to believe in love. Isabella, on the other hand, had spent years secretly loving him, and now he was hers. Yet, even as their passion grew, even as their hearts longed to be one, they remained respectful. They made a promise to wait until after marriage, to love each other with patience, to prove that their love was more than just desire. The sweetest moments. Each night, Damian would steal Isabella away from the busy household, leading her to the quiet rooftop where the stars shined only for them. He would sit behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist as she leaned back against his chest, their fingers intertwined, their breaths soft, warm, blending together. Do you ever think about the future? She whispered one evening, playing with his fingers. Damian pressed a soft kiss to her temple. All the time, he murmured. Her heart fluttered. What do you see? He sighed deeply, holding her tighter. I see us. Her breath hitched. I see us waking up together every morning, he continued, his voice filled with love. I see you standing in the kitchen, making breakfast, while I wrap my arms around you from behind. I see you smiling at me across the dinner table, laughing as we talk about our day. I see us dancing in the living room, with no music, just because we can. And he hesitated, his grip tightening slightly. What? Isabella turned, looking up at him. He smiled, tucking a braid behind her ear. I see you holding our baby one day. Isabella's eyes widened, her heart skipping a beat. A baby. Their baby. Her lips trembled. Do you really want that? Damian cupped her face gently, his brown eyes sincere, full of longing. I want everything with you, Isabella, he whispered. I don't just love you. I want to build a life with you. Tears burned in her eyes as she leaned up and kissed his cheek softly. I love you, she whispered, and he smiled. I love you more. A test of patience. Despite their growing love, they remained patient. Damian wanted Isabella to know that she was not just a temporary passion. He wanted her to feel cherished, respected, valued, and Isabella, she wanted their first night together to be special, meaningful, unforgettable. I don't want to rush, she admitted. One evening, as they lay under the stars, Damian kissed her forehead. Then we won't, he promised. They held hands, hearts racing, but they never crossed the line. Instead, they spent every moment falling deeper, every stolen glance, every touch of their fingers, every whispered, I love you. It was enough, for now, because they knew their time would come. And when it did, it would be worth the wait. A ring, a wedding, a promise. One evening, Damian surprised Isabella with a ring, a simple yet elegant diamond ring, not just a symbol of his wealth, but of his devotion. She gasped as he slipped it onto her finger. It's beautiful, she breathed. Damian smiled. Not as beautiful as you. She blushed, looking up at him. I still can't believe this is real. He chuckled, pulling her close. Believe it, my love, because in a few days, you'll be my wife. Her heart swelled with happiness as she wrapped her arms around his neck. I can't wait, she whispered. Neither could he. They were ready to start their life together, ready to love without limits, ready to belong to each other forever. But fate had other plans, and soon their love would be tested like never before. The shadows of temptation. Unbeknownst to Isabella, Damian's perfect world was about to be shaken, because soon a woman would enter his life, a woman who would whisper lies into his ears, a woman who would make him forget his promises, a woman who would tear apart the love he thought could never be broken. And once again, Isabella's heart would be on the line. Would Damian's love survive the storm, or would temptation destroy everything? Only time would tell. A night to remember. The week before their wedding, Damian wanted to give Isabella a night she would never forget. He wanted to show her how deeply he loved her, how much she meant to him. So, he arranged something special, a private dinner, a luxurious hotel suite, a night meant just for them, a night of love. The romantic surprise. That evening, Isabella stood before the mirror, her heart pounding as she adjusted her dress. It was a simple yet elegant silk gown, hugging her curves in all the right places. Her braided hair fell gracefully over her shoulder. Her lips, painted a soft shade of red, looked irresistible. Tonight felt different, exciting, intoxicating. As she stepped out of her room, Damian was already waiting for her by the car. The moment his eyes fell on her, he froze. She was breathtaking. His heart clenched as he took in her beauty, the delicate curves of her body, the way her stunning eyes shined under the moonlight. You. His voice was hoarse, his throat dry. You look. Isabella blushed under his intense gaze. Do I look okay? She asked softly. Damian stepped closer, his fingers brushing over her cheek. You look like a dream, he whispered. Her heart skipped a beat, and just like that, the night began. A night of candlelight and love. The hotel suite was beyond beautiful. A private rooftop garden overlooked the city skyline, adorned with fairy lights and delicate flowers. A round table stood in the middle, draped in fine silk, with candles flickering between crystal glasses. Soft music played in the background, a slow, romantic melody that made Isabella's heart ache in the best way. Damian pulled out a chair for her, his fingers grazing her skin as she sat down. The touch sent a wave of heat through her body. As they dined, their eyes met across the table. Every stolen glance, every touch, every whisper of laughter. Desire burned between them like a silent fire. After dinner, Damian stood and reached for her hand. Dance with me, he murmured. Isabella hesitated. But there's no dance floor. Damian chuckled, pulling her up. We don't need one, she smiled, stepping into his arms as he guided her into a slow, intimate dance. His hands rested firmly on her waist, while hers clung to his shoulders. Their bodies swayed, moving as one, hearts racing. Tonight, I just want to love you, he whispered into her ear. Her breath hitched. Her fingers tightened around his shirt. A storm of emotions swirled inside her. Fear, excitement, longing. For so long, they had waited, held back, respected the limits. But tonight, there were no limits. The moment of surrender, Damian led her inside the suite, his hand never leaving hers. The room was dimly lit, candles casting golden shadows along the walls. The air was thick with tension, unspoken words, unfulfilled desires. He turned to her, his brown eyes burning with something primal. Isabella. His voice was barely above a whisper. She swallowed hard, her heart pounding against her ribs. I don't know how to, she began, her voice trembling. Damian cupped her face, tilting her chin up. Shh. His thumb brushed against her lips. We don't have to do anything you're not ready for. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. But I am ready. She hesitated, searching his gaze. I want you to be my first and my last. A low growl escaped his lips as he pulled her into a deep, soul-searing kiss. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't forceful. It was pure, intense, consuming. He carried her to the bed, laying her down with the gentleness of a man who cherished the woman in his arms. Isabella trembled beneath him, her fingers tracing his jaw, his neck, his chest. He took his time, worshipping every inch of her, whispering how much he loved her, how beautiful she was. Their breaths tangled, their bodies burned, and as he finally made her his, Isabella gasped, feeling a connection deeper than anything she had ever known. Tears slipped from her eyes as she held on to him, becoming one with the man she loved. The morning after, when Isabella awoke, the golden morning light streamed through the curtains, illuminating the room. She turned and saw Damian beside her, watching her with the softest smile. Good morning, my love, he murmured. She blushed, burying her face into his chest. Morning. He kissed the top of her head. Did I hurt you? She shook her head. Number it was. She looked up, her cheeks warm. It was beautiful. Damian grinned, brushing his fingers through her braids. It was perfect, he corrected. They lay in each other's arms, basking in the afterglow of a love that had finally been sealed. For Isabella, this was the happiest moment of her life. She had given herself to the man she loved, and he had cherished her in every way possible. For Damian, this was more than just a night of passion. It was a promise to love her forever, a promise to never let her go. But promises can be broken. They spent the next few days in blissful happiness, preparing for their wedding. Damian couldn't wait to call Isabella his wife. He couldn't wait to start a new life with her. But fate had other plans, because soon a woman would walk into his life, a woman who would whisper sweet lies into his ears, a woman who would destroy the love he thought was unbreakable. And in the end, Damian would make the biggest mistake of his life, one that would cost him everything. A love sealed in forever. The day had finally arrived. The day Isabella became Damian's wife. A small yet breathtaking wedding ceremony was held in an elegant garden, surrounded by blooming roses and twinkling fairy lights. The gentle sound of a violin played in the background, adding to the magical atmosphere. Isabella stood at the entrance, a vision of pure beauty. Her wedding dress, a flowing white gown with intricate lace detailing, hugged her figure gracefully. A delicate veil cascaded down her back, and her stunning eyes sparkled with happiness. She clutched her bouquet of white roses, taking a deep breath. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from overwhelming love. At the altar, Damian stood in a tailored black tuxedo, his deep brown eyes locked onto her. His heart pounded as she took slow, graceful steps toward him. She was his peace, his happiness, his forever, and in just a few moments, she would become his wife. The vows that changed everything. When Isabella reached him, Damian took her hands in his, squeezing them gently. "You're beautiful," he whispered. A blush spread across her cheeks as the officiant began the ceremony. The moment came for their vows, and Damian cleared his throat, his voice thick with emotion. "Isabella, from the moment you entered my life, you brought a kind of warmth I never knew I needed. You're not just the woman I love. You're my peace, my heart, my everything. Today, I vow to love you, honor you, and cherish you for the rest of my life." Tears welled in Isabella's eyes. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Damian, you were the love I never expected, but the love I always dreamed of. Every moment with you has been filled with joy, with passion, with love. I promise to stand by your side, to love you with all my heart through every storm, through every season." A tear slipped down Damian's cheek. For the first time in his life, he felt truly complete. The officiant smiled. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Damian wasted no time. He pulled Isabella into a deep, passionate kiss as the guests erupted into cheers. His hands cradled her face, his lips moving against hers with a hunger that spoke of endless devotion. "You're mine, Isabella," he murmured against her lips. She smiled, resting her forehead against his. "Always." A honeymoon of bliss. The days following the wedding were like a dream. Damian whisked Isabella away to a luxurious honeymoon destination, a private beach villa surrounded by crystal clear waters and golden sand. They spent their days in each other's arms, whispering sweet nothings, making love under the stars, and falling deeper into a love that felt unbreakable. Damian had never been happier. Every morning he woke up to her smile. Every night he fell asleep to her warmth. Life felt perfect, but perfection never lasts forever. The beginning of the storm. One evening, Isabella prepared a candlelit dinner for Damian, eager to surprise him. She set the table, humming a soft tune, as she placed the last dish on the table. But as she turned to check her phone, a message flashed across the screen. Unknown number. I hope you're ready, darling, because soon he'll be mine. Her breath hitched, her fingers trembled as she read the words over and over again. Who was this? Before she could process it, she heard Damian's car pull into the driveway. Forcing a smile, she shoved the phone into her pocket, determined not to ruin the night. She didn't know it yet, but this message was only the beginning. A shadow from the past days passed, and Isabella tried to ignore the strange messages that kept coming. At first they were vague, harmless threats, cryptic warnings, but soon they became more personal. Unknown number. Do you really think you're enough for him? A maid, a nobody. He deserves better. Unknown number. He doesn't love you. You are just a phase. Isabella's heart shattered with every message. She told herself it wasn't true. Damian loved her. He had married her. But doubt began to creep into her heart. And then, one night, she saw her, a beautiful woman with icy blue eyes and fiery red lips, standing outside their house. The woman Damian once loved. The woman who had left him heartbroken years ago. The woman who had returned to take him back. The first crack in their love. That night, as Isabella lay in bed, Damian walked into the room, his expression unreadable. She turned to him, searching his face. Damian, who was that woman outside today? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He hesitated. She's from my past, he finally admitted. A heavy silence filled the room. Do you still love her? Isabella's voice was barely above a whisper. Damian's jaw clenched. No. But something about the way he said it made Isabella's chest tighten. Something was changing. Their love had felt invincible, but now cracks were beginning to form, and Isabella feared that soon everything they had built would come crashing down, a new disruption in their perfect life. It all began with a new face in the office, Vanessa. She was stunning. Long golden blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders in soft waves. Her icy blue eyes held a dangerous charm, and her smile was a deadly weapon. She wasn't just beautiful, she was calculating. And unfortunately, she was Damian's new personal secretary. From the very first day, Vanessa had set her sights on him. She watched how women in the office admired him, how they whispered about his power, his wealth, his charm. But unlike them, she wasn't there to admire. She was there to take, and what she wanted was Damian Carter. The seduction begins. Vanessa was an expert at playing her role. She wasn't aggressive, not at first. She played it smart, knowing exactly how to chip away at a man's loyalty without him even realizing it. It started with small things, a lingering touch when handing him documents, a soft laugh at even the most unamusing jokes, admiring glances filled with false innocence. And then the real game began. One evening, as Damian worked late, Vanessa brought him coffee, her movements graceful and deliberate. You work too hard, she murmured, setting the cup down. A man like you deserves someone who truly appreciates him. Damian barely looked up. I have Isabella. Vanessa smiled sweetly. Of course you do. But is she the one by your side right now? Is she the one seeing how exhausted you are? He exhaled, rubbing his temples. He wasn't in the mood for games. Vanessa leaned closer, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. You deserve to be spoiled, Damian. to be understood. Her voice was like silk, wrapping around his tired mind. He shrugged off her touch. I should go home. But as the days passed, her web tightened, and Damian, unknowingly, was walking right into it. The distance begins. At home, Isabella felt the change. It was subtle at first. Damian started coming home later than usual. The affectionate kisses that once greeted her at the door became quick pecks. Their late-night conversations, once filled with laughter and whispered dreams, were replaced with silence. He barely looked at her. At first, she convinced herself it was work stress, but deep inside, a terrifying thought whispered in her mind. What if he was slipping away? The first clue. One night, Damian came home even later than usual. Isabella waited in the dimly lit living room, her fingers clenched together in anxiety. When the door finally opened, she jumped to her feet. Damian, you're home, she said, trying to keep the worry from her voice. I was waiting for you. He loosened his tie, barely looking at her. I told you I'd be working late. She swallowed. You've been working late every night this week. His jaw tightened. It's just a busy time. Isabella stepped closer, searching his face. Is it work or something else? For the briefest second, his expression faltered. Then, just as quickly, his face hardened. Don't start, Isabella. I'm tired. He walked past her, disappearing into the bedroom. Isabella stood frozen, her heart pounding, that flicker of hesitation in his eyes. It was something else. The unthinkable confession. The next week was worse. Damian was practically a ghost in their home. He barely touched her, barely spoke to her. And then, the night came. Isabella sat at the dining table, staring at the untouched food she had prepared. The candles flickered, the soft music in the background only making the silence feel heavier. It was midnight when Damian finally walked in. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, his tie loosened, and he reeked of a woman's perfume. Isabella's stomach dropped. She slowly stood up, her voice barely above a whisper. Damian, where were you? He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. I was. Don't lie to me. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. Then his voice came. Low, broken, and devastating. I was with Vanessa. Isabella staggered back. Her mind refused to believe it. What do you mean? She choked out. Damian ran a hand down his face. She kissed me. A sharp pain shot through Isabella's chest. No, this wasn't real. He stepped forward, guilt in his eyes. I didn't kiss her back, I swear. But I didn't stop it right away. Tears spilled down Isabella's cheeks. Her worst fear had become real. She wanted to scream, to demand why, but all she could whisper was, Do you love her? Damian's breath hitched. His eyes darkened with emotion. And then, in the most heart-shattering moment of her life, he hesitated, even for just a second. That 1 second was enough to break her. Her voice trembled. You don't know, do you? He opened his mouth, but no words came out. And in that moment, Isabella knew. She had already lost him. The words that shattered her world. The night was cold, yet Isabella felt like she was burning. Damian stood in front of her, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his face expressionless, like a stranger, not the man she had once loved with her entire soul. She waited, hoping, praying that he would take it back. But then, he said the words that destroyed her. I'm sorry, Isabella. I think I love Vanessa. I want a divorce. For a moment, her mind went blank. The world around her seemed to fade away. Did she hear that correctly? Her heart pounded so loudly that she couldn't even hear herself breathe. She took a step back, shaking her head in disbelief. "Wh- What did you just say?" she whispered. Damien exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair. "I said, I want a divorce." Her knees threatened to buckle. No, this wasn't happening. She had given him everything: her love, her trust, her body, her dreams, her entire life. And now he was throwing her away like she meant nothing, like she was just a phase in his life. The pain of betrayal. Isabella's throat tightened. Her hands trembled as she clenched the fabric of her dress. "Damien, how could you?" Her voice cracked, her eyes filling with hot tears. He looked away, guilt flickering across his face, but he didn't take it back. Instead, he spoke again, his tone softer but still firm. "I never wanted to hurt you, Isabella, but my feelings for Vanessa—" "Don't!" Isabella cut him off, her voice rising. "Don't say her name." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she took slow, shaky breaths. "She's just a passing obsession, Damien," she pleaded. "You love me. You married me. We promised each other forever." Damien clenched his jaw. "I thought I loved you, but maybe I was wrong." Those words hit her harder than a knife to the heart. Her breath caught in her throat. She staggered back, staring at him in horror. "Wrong," she echoed in a broken whisper. How could he say that? How could he act like everything they had meant nothing? She searched his face, desperate to find the man she had once known, the man who whispered sweet promises under the stars, the man who kissed her tears away and vowed to never hurt her. But that man was gone. The papers that ended everything. Damien turned to the side table and picked up a stack of crisp white papers. Divorce papers. He had already prepared them. He had planned this. A sob escaped her lips. He wasn't changing his mind. She looked at the papers, then back at him, her entire body shaking. "You're really doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, his eyes held guilt, regret, but not love. Yes, a sharp pain shot through her chest. She had fought for him, defended him, loved him with everything she had. And this was how their story ended, with a piece of paper, with Vanessa's name replacing hers. Tears blurred her vision as she reached for the pen. Her hands trembled as she held it over the document. Her heart screamed at her to stop, to fight, to beg him to come back. But she knew better. A man who truly loved her would have never let her go. He had already made his choice. So, with a heavy heart, she made hers. She pressed the pen to the paper and signed her name. Walking away from love. The moment she lifted the pen, something inside her broke. A pain so deep, so unbearable, that she couldn't breathe. Damien took the papers from her, glancing at her signature. A shadow crossed his face, but it was too late. She wiped away her tears and straightened her spine. If he could be strong enough to let her go, then she could be strong enough to walk away. She turned toward the door. Every step felt like a knife to her soul. At the doorway, she stopped. Slowly, she turned around, her eyes filled with unshed pain. "I hope she was worth it, Damien," she whispered. And then she walked out, leaving behind the man who once held her heart, leaving behind everything. A wedding without a soul. Damien stood at the altar, watching Vanessa walk toward him in a dazzling white gown. The guests whispered about how perfect they looked together, how lucky he was to marry such a stunning woman. But as he forced a smile, an unsettling feeling crept into his heart. Something was missing. He should have been happy. This was his choice. Yet, as Vanessa slipped the ring onto his finger, he felt nothing. A memory flashed in his mind. Isabella's teary smile on their wedding day. The way she trembled when she said, "I do." The way she loved him with all her soul. But he pushed the thought away. This was his life now. As the priest announced them husband and wife, Vanessa pulled him into a kiss. But even as their lips met, her touch felt cold. The hollow life he chose days turned into weeks, and Damian slowly realized that his new wife was nothing like Isabella. Vanessa didn't wake up early to prepare his coffee. Vanessa didn't wait by the door, eager to greet him with a warm embrace after work. Vanessa didn't press his suits, didn't run her fingers through his hair as he lay his head on her lap. Everything felt empty. At first, he tried to ignore it. He convinced himself that he just needed time, that things would get better. But every night, when he rolled over in bed and found cold silk sheets instead of Isabella's warmth, a deep loneliness settled in his chest. And when Vanessa barely looked up from her phone as he walked through the door, he knew he had made the worst mistake of his life. Memories that haunt him. One evening, Damian stood in his massive bedroom, staring at the spot where Isabella used to sit, brushing her long dark hair. He could still hear her soft laughter, still feel her gentle hands fixing his tie before he left for work, still remember the way she whispered, "I love you," with all the sincerity in the world. A lump formed in his throat. He had thrown it all away. For what? For a woman who only cared about fancy dinners, designer dresses, and expensive vacations. For someone who barely noticed when he was in the room. And yet, he had destroyed Isabella for this. He clenched his fists, hating himself. Was Isabella crying herself to sleep at night? Was she suffering the way he was? Did she still love him? Or had she moved on? The thought killed him, but he deserved this pain. He deserved to suffer. The shocking truth. Damian drowned himself in work to escape his regret. But one night, as he was finishing a late meeting, he received a message from an unknown number. A single image. His heart nearly stopped. It was Vanessa, in a hotel room, wrapped around another man. His vision blurred with rage. His chest tightened with disbelief. Number. It couldn't be. Vanessa was cheating on him. The woman he destroyed Isabella for. A cold laugh escaped his lips. The irony, the betrayal he had inflicted on Isabella was now happening to him. A broken man, Damian stormed into the hotel, his pulse pounding. He kicked open the door, and there she was. Vanessa, his wife, in another man's arms. She gasped, but there was no guilt in her eyes, no regret. She just rolled her eyes. "Oh, Damian," she sighed. "You're being dramatic." His fists trembled at his sides. "You're cheating on me." She smirked. "And you knew what kind of woman I was when you married me." His stomach dropped. She never loved him. She never cared. He had been nothing but a fool. The weight of his mistake. That night, Damian sat alone in the dark, his hands shaking as he held a bottle of whiskey. The memories of Isabella flooded his mind. How she loved him unconditionally. How she cried when she signed the divorce papers. How she whispered, "I hope she was worth it." But Vanessa wasn't worth it. She was nothing compared to Isabella. And now, Isabella was gone. Forever. For the first time in his life, Damian Carter, a man who thought he had everything, felt truly empty. And he knew he had lost the greatest woman he would ever love. A desperate search. Damian had never driven so fast in his life. His hands were gripping the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. His heart pounded wildly against his ribs, as if it knew this was his last chance. He had spent weeks searching for Isabella, sleepless nights, endless regrets. When he finally found out where she was, he couldn't breathe. Her parents were forcing her to remarry. Panic surged through him. What if she said yes? What if she agreed just to escape the pain he caused? What if he had lost her forever? Number, he wouldn't let that happen. Damian pressed the gas pedal harder, racing against time. He needed to stop her. He needed her. The moment he sees her again. Damian's car screeched to a halt outside Isabella's childhood home. His heart dropped. There she was, standing at the doorstep in a simple yet elegant dress, her dark braids cascading over her shoulder. But she looked different, thinner, paler, like she had spent weeks drowning in sadness. Damian's throat tightened. This was his fault. She turned slowly, her deep brown eyes locking onto his. A storm of emotions flickered across her face. Shock, pain, longing. His breath caught. She was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. But now, she was untouchable, broken, by him. A plea for forgiveness. Damian stepped forward, his heart in his throat. Isabella. His voice cracked as he whispered her name, as if saying it could bring back everything he lost. She stiffened, her hands trembling. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice cold but laced with emotion. Damian swallowed hard. "I was a fool. I was blind. I made the worst mistake of my life." Tears gathered in her eyes, but she turned away, clenching her fists. Damian, don't. But he wasn't giving up. Not this time. He took another step, his deep brown eyes filled with raw regret. "I love you, Isabella," he said, his voice hoarse with pain. "I never stopped loving you. Every second without you has been hell. Please, forgive me." A tear rolled down her cheek, but she wiped it away angrily. "You broke me, Damian," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You shattered me. I gave you everything, and you threw me away like I was nothing." He felt those words like a knife to the chest. He had done that to her. His legs weakened, and before he could think, he dropped to his knees. Her gasp was sharp, her eyes widening, but he didn't care. He would kneel before her for a lifetime, if it meant earning her forgiveness. "Please, Isabella," he choked out, his hands shaking. "Give me one last chance. Let me prove I will never leave you again. I swear on my soul, on everything I have, I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you." She looked at him, her chest rising and falling rapidly. For a moment, the world stood still. A war between heart and mind. Isabella's mind screamed at her to walk away, to never trust him again. But her heart still belonged to him. No matter how much pain he caused, no matter how many tears she had cried, she still loved him. She hated herself for it. Her lips trembled. "Damian, I never wanted another man. I never will." His breath hitched. Hope flickered in his eyes. But she swallowed hard. "I don't know if I can ever forget what you did." Damian's heart ached. "Then let me make you forget," he whispered desperately. "Let me show you that I can love you better than before. Let me heal every wound I gave you." Silence. A painful, suffocating silence. Then Isabella closed her eyes, tears falling freely. She wanted to say no. She needed to say no. But her heart refused. She took a trembling breath and whispered, "Damian, I don't know if I can forgive you, but I—" Before she could finish, a voice interrupted. "Isabella, We need to go. The groom is waiting. Damian's blood froze. His head snapped toward the voice. Isabella's mother, standing in the doorway with a cold stare. His heart stopped. He had run out of time. A man who wouldn't give up. Damian had lost Isabella once. He wouldn't lose her again. For weeks, he did everything to win her back. He didn't just send flowers. He didn't just beg. He proved himself. He started showing up at her father's shop, offering to help with repairs. He cooked meals and sent them to her house, remembering all her favorite dishes. He left letters outside her door, not of love, but of regret. I failed you. I won't stop proving that I can be better. I don't expect you to take me back, but I will never stop loving you. You are my home, Isabella, and I will wait for you, even if it takes forever. The moment that changed everything. One evening, Isabella stood in her room, staring at his latest letter. She had tried to hate him, tried to move on, but every time she closed her eyes, it was his face she saw. Every time she heard his name, her heart ached instead of burning in anger. Could she really let go? She took a deep, shaky breath, and then she knew where she had to go. The rooftop reunion. The rain poured down as Damian stood on their old rooftop spot. His clothes were soaked, but he didn't care. He was waiting for a miracle. And then, soft footsteps. His breath stopped. He turned, and there she was, Isabella, his Isabella, standing in the rain, her eyes shining with unshed tears. His heart bounded. Isabella. She stood there, silent, her lips trembling. "Why are you here?" she finally whispered. His throat tightened. He stepped forward, but carefully. "I told you," he said hoarsely. "I will wait for you forever." A tear slid down her cheek, mixing with the rain. "You hurt me," she whispered. "I know," he said, his voice raw, "and I will never forgive myself for it." Silence. Then Isabella took a step forward, and then another, and before he could react, she threw herself into his arms. "I love you too," she whispered against his chest, her voice breaking. "I never stopped." Damian's breath hitched, his arms wrapped around her tightly, as if he was afraid to let go. This was real. She was his again, and this time, he would never lose her. A kiss that sealed forever. The rain poured around them, but they didn't notice, didn't care. All that mattered was this moment. Damian gently cupped her face, his fingers trembling. "I will love you better this time," he vowed, pressing his forehead against hers. "I swear it." Isabella gave him a tearful smile. "Then kiss me, Damian." And he did. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a promise, a seal to their love, their future, their forever. And as the storm raged on, they held on to each other, never letting go again.